I knew he was trouble the second he stepped into the war room and called my production pipeline cute. Not scalable, not outdated, cute. Like it was a finger painting instead of the architecture that carried their entire infrastructure through 2 funding rounds and a merger. He strutted in like he had just been photoshopped out of a tech magazine. Tight suit, tighter haircut, and the kind of confidence you only get from selling buzzwords instead of building systems. My name is Nyel. I am 41 years old, and for the past 6.5 years, I had been the principal systems architect at a mid-sized tech firm you probably have never heard of, but you have definitely used their backend without knowing it. I built that codebase. Line by line, sprint by sprint. When I joined, it was a skeleton of a product with more bugs than users. By the time they hired him, Jared, the new CTO, it was running smoothly enough to handle enterprise-level volume without blinking. And yes, I did that while being quietly passed over for 3 executive promotions, one of which went to a guy who thought front-end meant the homepage. Before I continue my story, let me know where you are watching from the comments and hit that like and subscribe button. Jared introduced himself like a motivational speaker trapped in a job interview. "We are not just upgrading code," he said, pacing in front of a screen full of meaningless graphs. "We are rewriting culture." What that actually meant was he was about to dismantle everything I had built. Not improve it, replace it. Without knowing a damn thing about how it worked. He called me the legacy thinker in his first team meeting. Not by accident and not just once. He joked that I still used a text editor, then asked our junior developer if we could AI optimize our sprint retrospectives. That is not a thing. But I nodded, smiled, and waited. Because I knew something he did not. Jared thought he was the smartest man in the room. But he never looked close enough at the contracts buried deep in company storage, especially not mine. The one my lawyer made iron-tight back in year 2, when I almost left. The one with clause 19.4. All intellectual property created by the employee shall revert in full to the employee if terminated without 90 days notice. Not severance. Ownership. But I said nothing. Not when he cut me out of strategy calls. Not when he rewrote the deployment pipeline and introduced security gaps I had already documented as high risk. Not even when he fired me. Over video call, no less, with a smug little line I will never forget. "All your ideas now belong to us." I had my camera on. I smiled. And I said, "You might want to read the fine print." He laughed. Then ended the call. He did not laugh 3 days later when he got the letter from my lawyer, nor when he saw the invoice. But let me take you back a bit because this story is not just about code or contracts. It is about what happens when you build something quietly, patiently, with everything you have, and someone walks in thinking they can just take it. I started documenting everything the second Jared arrived. Not out of paranoia, out of experience. Slack threads. Deployment logs. Git histories. Even the meeting recordings where he dismissed my architecture as prehistoric. I saved it all. My system was built under specific frameworks, and every major decision was traceable to my commits. I also had something better than evidence. I had trust. The engineers on my team knew, who actually kept the place running. And they knew I would never abandon them. So when Jared began cutting people out, shifting blame, and pushing half-tested features to production, it was not just me he was undermining. It was the whole damn foundation. The night before I was fired, I stayed late. Not to sabotage anything, but to ensure that when things did break, and they would break in the way I had documented months before. Vulnerabilities I had flagged, code pathways I warned about, processes I had protected, but he stripped out. Then I walked out. Quietly. Calmly. Because my contract said if they let me go without 90 days notice, every module, framework, and line of code I had ever touched reverted to me. Not licensed. Owned. The cease and desist letter went out 2 days after my termination, along with an itemized invoice for unauthorized use of proprietary systems. My lawyer Mitchell, who had worked for the same startup that had tried to claw back his IP once, knew exactly how to write it. No threats. Just law. The invoice? $2.7 million. Based on fair market value, prior investor reports, and a decade of documented IP lineage. Jared responded with an email that started with hilarious and ended with good luck. So Mitchell sent another letter. This one to the board. Attached, evidence of data mishandling, potential compliance violations, and the simple fact that 84% of their backend was built under a reversion clause they had now violated. And that was just the beginning. The funny thing about people like Jared is they always assume the room is full of mirrors, everyone just reflecting their ambition back at them. What they never expect is that someone might be quietly taking notes behind the glass. Within 24 hours of Mitchell's second letter reaching the board, the silence broke. It started with a reply from a board member's assistant, cold, clipped, and professional. "We are reviewing the terms outlined and will respond in due course." I read that 3 times and smiled, because that was not a denial. That was the sound of people checking the filing cabinets. In the meantime, things on their end were starting to crack. I was still connected to a few of the junior engineers on an encrypted channel we had used for code testing years ago. One of them, Priya, reached out the same day I was fired. No fluff. Just, "What did you build into the pipeline?" "Nothing malicious," I replied. But I hope they backed it up correctly. They had not. Jared, in his infinite wisdom, had pushed a migration schedule forward without finishing the required sandbox testing. The new model, a Frankenstein hybrid of mine and some outsourced container framework, was not stable. It held together for a day, maybe 2. But once the platform traffic started spiking again, something buckled. I watched the results from the outside like I was watching an old apartment burn down, not with joy, but with grim inevitability. Systems failed in a specific sequence, one I had outlined in a risk report 6 months earlier. They had ignored it. Jared had called it legacy paranoia. Turns out, paranoia is what kept their architecture from collapse. The investors were not amused. It took 3.5 days before the first article landed. TechCircle posted a short but brutal piece. Promising SaaS platform hit by sudden outage. Backend failure traced to missing documentation and departed architect. The headline said it all, and my inbox exploded with contacts from people I had not spoken to in years, engineers, managers, even 2 former CEOs. Then came the internal leak. Someone on the inside, probably one of the engineers still loyal to what we had built, forwarded me a copy of the internal memo Jared sent. It blamed me, by name, for sabotage through omission. It was laughable. First of all, that is not how omission works. Second, every flagged risk had been logged, timestamped, and sent to their system's inbox. I had the receipts. Mitchell drafted the next letter with surgical precision. It outlined every instance where my documented work had been altered or deployed without my permission. It included compliance risks tied to unlicensed use of my architecture. And it gave them 5 business days to respond. Day 2, a formal email arrived. This one from the company's legal counsel. Polite, but strained. They wanted to discuss terms for resolving this matter amicably. They were not offering anything yet, but the tone had changed. The arrogance was gone. They were listening now. But it was too late for easy resolutions. Jared had already crossed a line. Not just firing me, but dismissing what I had built like it was disposable. I had no interest in revenge for revenge's sake. I just wanted them to learn that you cannot treat people like plug-and-play modules. Not when those people know the system better than you ever will. And quietly, behind the scenes, I had leverage they had not even noticed. While Jared had been busy renaming folders and slashing documentation, he had missed one crucial detail. My code, real foundational modules, was still protected under a private repository. That repo, hosted under my own developer license, had been linked into the production build for years. It was clean, secure, and mine. That was not negligence. That was trust. The old CTO, Marcus, had understood the value of what I was building and authorized the hybrid structure with legal backing. Jared never read those contracts. He just assumed everything under the brand name was theirs by default. I still owned the keys, and I could revoke them. I did not pull the trigger immediately. I gave them time. A choice. Return the IP. Pay the fair invoice. Move forward like professionals. Instead, Jared doubled down. He posted a public memo on the company blog. No names, but full of buzzwords, reclaiming agility, breaking with outdated practices, embracing next-gen innovation. Underneath it all,
A lie.
the system he had restructured was still running my code, still failing because of his changes, still technically mine. So I revoked access. Legally, quietly, within my rights. Within 12 hours, the platform was down again. Fully this time. Transactional functions dead. Admin dashboards unresponsive. Customer tickets piling into the hundreds. And that is when the board finally called. Not a lawyer. Not an assistant. The chair of the board herself, reaching out to Mitchell directly. I was copied on the email. Short, professional, and finally, humble. We would like to speak with Ms. Nyel regarding terms for resolving the current intellectual property dispute and potential avenues for future collaboration. I agreed to a call, but I did not agree to anything else. Not yet. The day of the meeting, I wore the same gray blazer I had worn the day I got promoted to lead systems architect. Not for them, for me. To remember who I was before all of this. Someone who built things that lasted. Jared was not on the call. His name was never mentioned, but I could read between the lines. He had been cut loose. Probably still blaming legacy code in some Slack thread no one was reading anymore. The board offered me a deal. A return. Not just a return, but a new title. Full control of systems development. Name your price. Name your role. I said no. Not because I was angry. Not even because I could not forgive them. But because they had already shown me what kind of people they were when things got hard. And I had outgrown them. Instead, I made them another offer. I would license my code back to them at a premium, renewable annually, with full usage audits, and with my name legally acknowledged in every architecture report. I would help stabilize their system, as a consultant, on my terms. They agreed, and when I hung up, I finally exhaled. Not in victory, in clarity. You see, this was never about payback. It was about proof. That when you build something real, something that works, that endures, it cannot be stolen by someone who never understood it in the first place. And that is where the real power lies. The transfer agreement was signed at exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Wednesday. It was a clean, boring little document. A licensing contract, a few usage clauses, and a schedule of payment milestones. But to me, it was something else entirely. It was the moment I stopped being the employee who got discarded on a call and became the person they had to negotiate with. On my terms, with my timeline, with my name etched into the structure of every function they still relied on, but barely understood. The first invoice hit their account 2 days later, $870,000 for a 12-month license of the foundational framework. No equity, no titles, no stock options, just cash and control. I made it clear that any technical decisions involving my code required my explicit review. I was not going back to fix what Jared had broken. I was being paid to make sure they did not break it worse. The engineering team was the first to reach out. A message came in from Nadia, one of the senior devs who had stuck it out through the transition. She had been quietly redocumenting what Jared had stripped away. Her message read, "Thank you for keeping us afloat. We did not know how much he had erased until we tried to patch it." There was something painful in that. A kind of guilt. I did not hold it against her. No one had really known how fragile it had become. They had just trusted the loudest voice in the room. That was the thing about Jared. He had been loud. Charismatic in that way that convinces people you are wrong, just because you are quiet. He talked fast, moved fast, and left the details for someone else to clean up. That someone had always been me. But I was not cleaning up anymore. I was billing for it. One of the clauses in the license agreement required a full technical audit of system usage every 30 days. On the surface, it was about stability. But I had other reasons. I wanted visibility, not just into what they were doing with my code, but into how the culture had shifted since I left. The first audit?
A mess.
Unapproved forks, inconsistent patches, deprecated libraries merged without documentation. It was not malicious. Just sloppy. A company reeling from the kind of leadership vacuum that comes from chasing shiny new titles without understanding what those roles are for. They had promoted someone internally to replace Jared, a product manager named Seth. Polite, cautious, maybe a little too eager to apologize. He scheduled a one-on-one with me during the second week of the consultancy. He started with, "I just want to say, on behalf of everyone, we did not handle your departure the right way." I nodded. Let him speak. He fumbled through corporate politeness for about 3 minutes before getting to the real point. They needed help stabilizing the customer side of the platform. I agreed, but not as a favor. I charged them hourly. Every hour I worked now was tracked. Not by some punch-in app, but by me. Every suggestion I made was documented. Every solution I offered was licensed. For the first time in years, my work had boundaries, and those boundaries had value. And yet, not everything about it was satisfying. There was a part of me, quiet, buried deep under the strategy and contracts, that still felt the sting of what had happened. Not just the firing, the dismissal, the assumption that I could be erased like a sticky note on a whiteboard. So, I did something I had not done in a long time. I spoke at a developer conference. It was local, small, maybe 60 people in a rented auditorium downtown. I gave a talk on system integrity under executive turnover. It was half technical, half story. No names. No companies. Just lessons. What happens when architecture becomes invisible to leadership? What it means to protect your own contributions in environments that treat code like disposable paper. Afterward, people came up. Some asked about the contract clause. Others just nodded and said, "Thank you." But one person stood out. A young developer, maybe 25, said, "I always thought the company owned everything we made." I said, "Only if you let them." And that became a quiet mission. I started writing more. Not blogs. White papers. Legal guides. Contributor frameworks. I wanted every engineer, especially the ones still stuck in low-visibility roles, to know they could build protection into their careers just like they built fail-safes into their code. Meanwhile, the company kept paying. They launched a new product feature 6 weeks after our licensing agreement. I helped review the system paths, but warned them about overextending the client-side cache. They ignored the warning. And yes, it crashed. Not permanently, but publicly. Enough to cause backlash from early adopters and a warning shot from 2 of their investors. Seth called me the next morning and asked if I could help patch it before the end of day. I told him I would, but at double my standard rate. They agreed without blinking. Power shifts do not always happen with fireworks. Sometimes they happen in invoices, in contract lines, in the tone of a voice that no longer needs to ask for permission. At the 90-day mark, I reviewed our license terms. They wanted to renew early, afraid I might walk. I did not. Not because I needed them, but because I was building something larger than the consultancy. I was building precedent. And people were paying attention. Other companies started reaching out, not just to hire me, but to ask how they could protect their teams. I helped write new contract templates. Quietly. Professionally. I never went public with what had happened. I never needed to, because the system that once tried to erase me now had my name woven into it. Every deploy, every audit, every architecture review. And Jared? Last I heard, he had landed at a blockchain data company on the East Coast. No engineering team. Just slide decks and buzzwords. The kind of place where ideas go to die in a Google Drive folder. I did not hate him. I just never thought about him anymore, because I had finally stepped out of the role of protector and into the role of architect again, this time on my own terms. By the 4th quarter of that year, something strange started happening. I began getting called the ghost founder. Not publicly, not on record, just whispered, in the way companies talk about people they used to ignore until they became too important to forget. It was never my goal. I never wanted a title. I wanted respect. And I got it, but not through confrontation, through consistency. What I built had become indispensable, not just the code, but the clarity. The engineers who had once quietly copied my file structures were now quoting my internal documentation like doctrine. The system was finally being maintained properly, and the difference showed. Downtime dropped. Client satisfaction ticked up. And for the first time since my firing, there was stability. But by then, I was already building something else. A small firm. Just 6 people. No branding, no pitch deck. A private consultancy focused on infrastructure security, licensing guidance, and developer rights. I called it Stackline, a nod to the quiet backbone every flashy tech product stands on without ever acknowledging. My clients were not just companies. They were engineers. People like me, who had been pushed aside or locked out or made to feel like what they built was just company property until it broke and someone needed them again. I started offering internal IP audits, discrete reviews of code ownership, usage rights, and compliance. The more I dug, the more I realized something chilling. What happened to me was not unusual. It was the norm. Developers being fired, their work repackaged, their contributions wiped from history like they had never typed a line. So I taught them how to fight back. Legally, contractually,
strategically.
Meanwhile, the company that fired me was still paying my invoices. By now, they had licensed not just the original framework but 2 extensions I had developed under Stackline. They asked to make the contract evergreen. No renewal, just continuous payment. I declined. I wanted the option to walk away if they ever went backward again. And quietly, I was watching their moves. They had a new product in beta, something ambitious, built on top of my system. But they were planning to pitch it as entirely new.
I knew what that meant.
A potential PR spin. A quiet effort to distance the product from its foundation. From me. They scheduled a press briefing for the launch. A small event, mostly investors and media. I was not invited, which was fine. I had no intention of going. But 3 hours before the event, I got a message from a senior developer, still anonymous, still loyal. They scrubbed your name from the back-end documentation. All credits gone. They're calling it original IP now. I read the message twice. My stomach dropped, not from surprise, but from familiarity. It was happening again. The same tactic. New names. Same erasure. I forwarded the message to Mitchell. His reply, "We can stop them.
Do you want to?"
I stare at my screen for a long moment. Then I open the license contract. Section 7.3. Unauthorized alteration of metadata attribution constitutes breach of licensing terms, resulting in automatic revocation of all granted usage rights. It was clear. Binding. Final. I sent the notice at 9:42 a.m. The platform went dark at 10:07. Legally, contractually, precisely. Not a hack. Not sabotage. Just enforcement. Their access to my code was gone. Every linked module revoked. Every licensed function denied. And the media? They noticed. An article dropped that afternoon on TechLedger. New platform launch fails. Sources cite sudden IP conflict with original architect. By evening, my inbox was overflowing. Some were journalists. Others were developers. But most were engineers from inside other companies saying the same thing in different words. How did you do it? How can I do it too? I replied to everyone. Not with speeches. With structure. Here is how you protect your code. Here is how you write a reversion clause. Here is how you document your contributions so they are traceable. Here is how you prepare before they try to erase you. And slowly the industry started paying attention. A major tech conference invited me to keynote. I almost declined. But then I remembered that kid from the developer meetup, the one who thought all code belonged to the company. I thought about all the women, the older engineers, the quiet ones, the freelancers, the underpaid contract devs who built whole ecosystems in silence while someone else cashed the stock options. I went on stage. I told my story.
Professionally. Calmly.
Without naming names. But everyone knew. At the end of the talk, the room stood. Not because I was a hero. Because I had proven something they needed to believe. That code is power. And power is not about titles. It is about control. And control starts with a clause in a contract, a copy of a repository, and a record that you never let anyone else rewrite your name out of your work. The company never tried to erase me again. In fact, They sent a formal apology. Not for legal reasons, for survival. They needed the framework for another 2 years. They asked if I would consider relicensing under Stackline branding. I agreed. But only if every file bore the watermark. Licensed under Nyel systems. They printed it, embedded it, owned it, and I walked away. Not because I had to, because I could. It is strange how power shifts quietly. Not with shouting, not even with legal letters, but with one undeniable fact. I could say no. For years, I had been the woman in the room trying to be heard without being called difficult. The architect doing invisible work. The backbone of systems I never got credit for until they failed.
And now?
People asked for permission before they touched a line of my legacy. That was the word they started using, legacy. It used to sting. Jared had turned that word into an insult, as if legacy meant obsolete. But now, when people said it, they meant stability. They meant structure. They meant, this still works. And they said it with respect. I did not build Stackline to become famous. I built it because I knew what it felt like to be cut out of your own creation. To be told your work belongs to someone else because you are not in the right room when the decisions are made. I wanted to make sure fewer people ever had to feel that again. And they started showing up. Developers, designers, tech leads, quiet messages from every time zone. Some had been fired like I was. Others were still inside, trying to figure out how to protect what they were building before it got taken from them. I offered them what I never had, a map, a legal structure, a way forward. In less than a year, we helped 47 engineers write bulletproof clauses into their contracts. 9 of them ended up licensing their own code back to their former employers. 2 sued for unauthorized use, and one, a developer in Berlin, wrote to me and said, "You made me believe my work was mine." That message is still pinned to my wall. As for the company that fired me, they stabilized barely. They kept paying, but they were no longer the center of my universe. They were just a client, a line item, a monthly reminder of everything I had survived and how far I had come since that call where Jared smirked and said, "All your ideas now belong to us." They never did. Every system I had built, every architecture diagram, every redundant backup I had quietly maintained for years, it was mine. Because I had planned for this. Not because I was paranoid, but because I was precise. You do not spend your life writing systems just to let someone overwrite you. The story ended not with a courtroom or a confrontation, but with an email. From their new CTO, a different kind of leader this time. One who had actually read my documentation and respected its structure. He wrote, "We are grateful to be standing on what you built. We will never forget that." And I believed him. I do not need a corner office. I do not need a title. I have something better. My name. In the code. In the structure. In the story. This was not just revenge. It was reclamation. A quiet, calculated shift of power that turned a firing into a legacy and a loss into leverage. So if you are watching this and you are where I was, fired, erased, underestimated, let me tell you something I wish someone had told me. They can take your job. They can take your title. But if you protect what you build, they can never take your work.